Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into the life of, well, one of the most celebrated and maybe complex figures in modern literature, Ernest Hemingway.
Absolutely. When you think Hemingway, you probably get that picture right. The icon.
Yeah, the adventurer, the rugged sportsman, always on the move. He was an American novelist, journalist, short story writer, 1899 to 1961. And his style, that economical, understated prose, it just completely redefined how stories were told in the 20th century.
It really did. But what's fascinating and what we really want to get into today is that huge gap, isn't it, between the spareness of the writing and the absolute utter chaos of his biography.
Total chaos. I mean, a life of staggering drama, war correspondent, safari hunter, deep-sea fisherman.
And the accolades, too. Pulitzer in 53, the Nobel Prize in Literature in 54.
Right.
So our mission for you today, really, is to try and bridge that chasm. Because the sources we've looked at, they really show the man and the writer are just inseparable. We're going to unpack his biography, look at how he engineered that radical literary style, and also cover his tragic decline, both mentally and physically.
All to understand that key question. How did all these overwhelming experiences, this profound trauma, how did that get distilled into work famous for being so objective, almost clinical?
Exactly. It's quite a puzzle.
It's an extraordinary journey we're taking together. We'll start in conservative Illinois, then jump pretty quickly to the shrapnel-filled fields of Italy.
Then on to Paris, the lost generation, those smoky salons.
Yeah, then adventures in Africa, the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
Right up to those dramatic, sometimes frankly bizarre final years in Idaho.
It's quite a ride.
It really is. So get ready, because you're starting right at the beginning. The making of the man who'd become Papa Hemingway.
Okay, so Ernest Miller Hemingway, born July 21st, 1899, Oak Park, Illinois.
Oak Park. And you described it as affluent, very conservative.
Very. If you know the area, it's all about piety restraint.
Which is just peak irony considering the life he ended up leading. Right.
Completely. His parents, Clarence, who was a doctor, a respected physician, and Grace, his mother, a musician, they gave him this cultured upbringing. But like you said, it was riddled with contradictions from day one.
And that duality seems crucial.
Oh, absolutely. The sources really highlight that tension straight away. His mother, Grace, she was apparently quite determined to keep him and his slightly older sister, Marceline, looking like a matched pair.
Like twins.
Sort of, yeah. For his first 3 years, she kept his hair long, dressed him in these frilly, feminine clothes.
Wow, okay.
And this enforced femininity, which you get the sense he really chafed against. It stood in such stark contrast to the other side of his education, the rougher, hypermasculine stuff from his father.
Right, the outdoorsman.
Exactly.
And that contrast really did define him, didn't it? On one hand, you've got these reluctant cello lessons pushed by his musician mother, but here's where it gets fascinating. Hemingway himself apparently said later those lessons contributed to what he called the contrapuntal structure of For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Isn't that incredible, that connection?
It really is. Can you unpack that a bit? Contrapuntal.
Sure. So in music, counterpoint or contrapuntal texture, it's about weaving together multiple independent melodic lines simultaneously.
Okay.
Hemingway sort of translates this idea into narrative. It seems the cello training gave him an ear, maybe subconsciously, for how you could run these simultaneous independent threads, voices, narratives, themes, within one big structure.
Like in Bell Tolls.
Exactly like Bell Tolls. You've got Robert Jordan's internal thoughts, you've got the dialogue happening around him, you've got the constant looming reality of the war, all playing out at the same time, like different melodies working together.
That makes sense. And meanwhile, his father's doing the complete opposite.
Right. Instilling this lifelong passion for the outdoors, teaching young Ernest woodcraft, hunting, fishing, camping up in northern Michigan.
And that passion, that connection to wild places, self-sufficiency, it becomes the backdrop for so much of his best work, doesn't it?
Almost all of it, yeah. And this fusion, the sensitive artist, the disciplined athlete, it really starts to come together in high school.
He did everything. Boxing, track, football.
But also editing the school paper, the Trapeze. And not just editing. He was actively imitating the popular sports writers of the day, guys like Ring Lardner.
So he's already honing that voice.
Practicing. And that practice, that imitation, it prepared him for what you could argue were the most important 6 months of his early career.
Which was that stint at the Kansas City Star, right after high school.
Yeah, just 6 months as a cub reporter.
Yeah.
But that experience, as you said earlier, it became the absolute bedrock of the entire Hemingway style.
It's revolutionary, really, when you think about how different American prose sounded before him.
It wasn't just a job. It was like a stylistic boot camp. The Star's style guide gave him these non-negotiable rules.
What were they again?
Simple, declarative, almost brutal in their clarity. Use short sentences, use short first paragraphs, use vigorous English, be positive, not negative.
Wow, no messing around.
None. It forced constraint. It stripped away all that flowery, adjective-heavy prose you got in the 19th century. It was creating a whole new way to build a story. Anti-purple prose training, basically.
And that style gets tested almost immediately in the crucible of World War I.
Yeah. He couldn't join the U.S. Open poor eyesight.
Right. So he volunteers. Ambulance driver for the American Red Cross Motor Corps in Italy. This is 1917.
And the shift from that clean, conservative Kansas City newsroom to the chaos of war, it's immediate, isn't it?
Brutally immediate. On his very first day in Milan, he witnesses the aftermath of a munitions factory explosion. Sheer carnage.
Oh, God.
He was sent to retrieve the dead. He later described it as collecting the shredded remains of female workers. A truly visceral introduction to modern industrial death.
And then, just days later, the big one. The incident that changes everything.
July 8th, 1918. Salta di Piave. He's delivering comfort cigarettes, chocolate to the frontline troops. And he gets hit. Badly. Mortar shrapnel.
He was only 18.
Just 18. The shrapnel wounds were severe, both legs. But the psychological impact, maybe even more profound.
That's when he talked about losing the illusion of immortality.
Exactly. He said something like, other people get killed, not you. Then when you are badly wounded the first time, you lose that illusion and you know it can happen to you.
That moment of realization, that death is right there, random.
It's the foundation of his whole tragic worldview, really.
But even badly wounded, the sources say he was incredibly brave.
Oh, yeah. He helped Italian soldiers get to safety before dealing with his own injuries, which earned him decorations, the Italian War Merit Cross, the Silver Medal of Military Valor.
So physical courage. But the wounds weren't just physical, were they? There was an emotional one during his recovery, too.
Right. 6 months recuperating in Milan. He falls hard for Agnes von Kurowski.
The Red Cross nurse.
Yeah. 7 years older than him. He was convinced they were getting married, poured all that youthful hope into it.
But she rejected him.
Months later, yeah. Via letter. Said she gotten engaged to an Italian officer.
Ouch. Biographers really focus on that moment, don't they? Calling it devastating, scarring. Why is it so critical?
Well, because it seems to have immediately set up this toxic pattern in his future relationships, his marriages.
How so?
The shock of being abandoned like that,
Yeah.
so unexpectedly by Agnes, it looks like it created a kind of defense mechanism. In his later marriages, Hemingway consistently leaves the wife before she has a chance to leave him.
Preemptive abandonment.
Exactly, a cycle of emotional preemption.
Yeah.
And it seems rooted in that double shock of WWI, the physical loss of control over life and the emotional loss of control over love.
So where did he find solace?
Well, as we see in that famous Nick Adams story, Big Two-Hearted River, the only reliable comfort seemed to be nature. Going back to northern Michigan, seeking solitude, trying to find some kind of peace, some psychological recalibration after the war.
Okay, so he comes back to the States. He marries Hadley Richardson in 1921. She's 8 years older, right? Seemed to provide a bit of stability.
Yeah, a nurturing presence, perhaps. And then they make the big move, Paris.
On Sherwood Anderson's advice?
Right. Anderson gave them letters of introduction, told them to join the expatriate scene over there.
And Paris. I mean, that's where the Hemingway persona really gets forged, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's the forge. Initially, he's working as a foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star.
Still keeping that journalistic muscle flexed.
Covering everything from, post-war political crises to fishing reports, maintaining that vigorous discipline. But at the same time, he gets adopted by the giants of modernism.
This is where the famous names come in. Gertrude Stein.
Right, the doyenne of Montparnasse. She becomes his mentor, godmother to his son Jack Bumby. And she introduces him to that whole circle.
The artists, the writers.
The painters, sculptors, and crucially the other American writers who are all trying to figure out this post-war world.
And Stein gives them that name, right?
She does. The Lost Generation. That term she coined referred to that whole post-WWI cohort. Feeling spiritually adrift, displaced, disillusioned by the collapse of old values after the, frankly, pointless slaughter of the war.
Beyond Stein, who else was key?
Ezra Pound. Big time. Pound had just finished basically shaping T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Wow.
They met sort of by chance in 1922. Pound immediately saw the raw talent in Hemingway and helped him hone his prose, cut the fat.
And James Joyce. Didn't he hang out with Joyce?
Apparently went on alcoholic sprees with him frequently. I mean, can you imagine a more intense, more challenging intellectual environment for a young writer?
No kidding. Demanding, anti-establishment, obsessed with style.
Totally focused on stylistic innovation. But this period, this intense creative growth, it gets hit by a catastrophe. The lost manuscripts.
Ugh. Yeah, this story still makes writers physically uncomfortable. December 1922.
Hadley's traveling to meet him in Geneva, takes a suitcase full of his work onto the train to the Gare de Lyon in Paris.
And loses it.
Loses it. Almost everything he'd written up to that point. Early fiction, short stories, drafts. Gone.
He must have been.
Devastated and furious.
Yeah.
According to the sources. Understandably.
Yeah.
But, you could almost argue it was a weird kind of creative purification.
How do you mean?
Well, he was forced to focus only on the few scraps, the handful of stories that survives or that he rewrote from memory. It reinforced that journalistic need for precision, for constraint. He couldn't get lost in old drafts. He had to strip down, build again.
And that forced focus paid off pretty quickly.
It did. His first book, 3 Stories and 10 Poems, comes out in 1923. Then the collection In Our Time in 24, and the expanded In Our Time in 25, which had Indian Camp.
And critics noticed immediately.
Oh, yeah. Especially back in the U.S., they were struck by that crisp, declarative style, recognized it as something new, something powerful, especially in the short story form.
And that success coincides with meeting F. Scott Fitzgerald, 1925.
Right. Their friendship, famously volatile.
Yeah.
A real mix of admiration and hostility.
Yeah, I've read about that.
Fitzgerald was already a big name, right? And he encouraged Hemingway, pushed him towards a novel. Apparently reading The Great Gatsby was the thing that really convinced Hemingway his next big project had to be a novel.
And that novel comes out of Spain, doesn't it? The bullfighting.
Exactly. He becomes fascinated by bullfighting after visiting the festival of San Fermin in Pamplona. After his third trip there, he sits down and starts drafting. The sun also rises. On his birthday, July 21st, 1925.
And finishes it how quickly?
A breakneck 8 weeks later.
Incredible.
The Sun Also Rises comes out in 1926. Becomes the book for that post-war expatriate crowd, cements Stein's Lost Generation label.
But Hemingway himself complicated that label later, didn't he?
He did. He told his editor, Max Perkins, that the real point of the book wasn't that they were lost, but that the earth abideth forever. Implying the characters were maybe battered, wounded by the war, sure, but that being lost was a temporary human thing, not some permanent spiritual damnation. The earth endures. They endure, in a way.
That's a really interesting nuance. But okay, while his literary star is definitely rising, his personal life, not so smooth.
No. The first marriage starts to fall apart. He begins an affair with Pauline Pfeiffer in early 1926.
Hadley finds out.
Eventually, yes. He divorces Hadley in January 1927, marries Pauline just a few months later, in May. He even converted to Catholicism before marrying her.
And this whole intense Paris chapter, it ends with another weird injury.
It does.
Yeah.
It perfectly illustrates that blend of drama and sheer absurdity in his life. He publishes Men Without Women in 27, which includes the great boxing story 50 Grand.
Yeah.
But just before he and Pauline leave Paris for Key West in 1928, he's in a bathroom, reaches up to pull what he thinks is the toilet chain.
But it's not the toilet chain.
It's the rope for the skylight. Pulls the whole thing down right on his head.
Oh my God, serious.
Seriously, gives himself this massive gash, leaves a prominent forehead scar for the rest of his life.
That's almost slapstick for this icon of masculinity.
It's bizarre. But it kind of underscores that point the sources make. After leaving Paris in March 1928, Hemingway never again lived in a big city. He was seeking those wilder, more isolated places from then on. ###3, adventure, war, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1928-1940.
Okay, so they leave Paris, head back to the States, settling in Key West eventually, but 1928 is a good year. Professionally good, personally devastating.
Yeah, another one of those intense juxtapositions. His son Patrick is born that year. They're establishing this new life in Key West. But then, just 6 months later, December 1928, news comes about his father.
Clarence.
Yeah. Clarence had died by suicide, used his own father's Civil War pistol.
Oh, wow. That must have hit Hemingway incredibly hard.
Profoundly. The sources say he felt deeply responsible, worried about his father's mental state. And he made that chilling remark, didn't he? I'll probably go the same way.
Prophetic, tragically. That knowledge, that shadow of hereditary mental instability, you feel it adds another layer of darkness to his work after that, don't you?
You absolutely do. That specific kind of tragedy. But despite that immense personal blow, his career just hits a new high. He finishes A Farewell to Arms.
Published in 1929. And this book really cements his reputation, right? Major American writer status.
Undeniably. But think about the craft involved. He famously rewrote the ending. What was it, 17 times?
17 times. Why? What was he trying to get right?
It speaks volumes about his obsession with realism, with emotional truth. He wasn't just fiddling with plot points. He was wrestling with fate, with tragedy itself.
Okay.
He needed that ending where Catherine Barkley and the baby die to feel absolutely inevitable, not just tacked on or melodramatic. Each rewrite was this attempt to find the perfect, cold, objective correlative for that specific kind of loss.
The journalistic mind applying surgical precision to tragedy.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
And that obsession with life and death, it carries right into his Key West research phase in the early 30s.
Death in the Afternoon, 1932. This incredibly detailed, almost anthropological study of bullfighting.
Which he saw as more than just a sport.
Oh, much more. He called it of great tragic interest, being literally of life and death. For him, it was this ritualized confrontation with mortality. Grace under pressure, all that.
And then he gets the boat, the Pillar, in 1934.
Right. Buys the Pillar, dives deep into deep-sea fishing in the Caribbean. More solitude, more physical rigor. That constant need for authentic action seems like a necessary counterweight to the intense mental work of writing.
And then comes Africa.
The Big Safari, 1933. He and Pauline go on this 10-week trip, Kenya, Tanganyika territory.
And that one trip fuels a huge amount of writing.
Tremendous output. The nonfiction Green Hills of Africa in 35. And two of his absolute classic short stories, The Smoes of Kilimanjaro and The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber.
A prolific time, but also dangerous, wasn't it?
Always dangerous with Hemingway, it seems.
Yeah.
During that safari, he gets amoebic dysentery. Really bad case. Leads to a prolapsed intestine. Had to be dramatically evacuated by plane. It's just another example of how his life was lived right on the edge, constantly gathering material through these brushes with serious illness or death.
That restless energy doesn't keep him stateside for long, though. Soon he's back in a war zone.
The Spanish Civil War. Starts covering it in 1937 for the North American Newspaper Alliance. And he sees its significance immediately, calls it an international testing ground for what's coming in Europe.
And he's not alone there, is he?
No. He's accompanied by Martha Gellhorn, the journalist.
Who he'd met in Key West.
Right, and Gellhorn was different. Sources suggest she never catered to him the way other women did, a real peer professionally.
And that partnership turns romantic.
Quickly. Leads to the end of his marriage with Pauline. Divorce is finalized, and he marries Martha in Wyoming in November 1940, his third wife.
But Spain also caused a major rift with another writer friend, didn't it? John Dos Passos.
Yeah, a really painful break. Hemingway was brought in to work on the screenplay for the propaganda film The Spanish Earth, essentially replacing Dos Passos.
Why did Dos Passos leave?
His friend and translator, Jose Robles, had been arrested and executed by Republican forces. Dos Passos felt Hemingway didn't do enough, didn't use his influence to help Robles. It created this huge ideological and personal split. Permanent.
While all this is happening, Madrid is under siege.
Relentless bombardment. And in the midst of that, Hemingway writes his only play, The Fifth Column. But the real literary culmination of this period comes shortly after. He's dividing his time between his new home in Cuba, Finca Vigia, and Sun Valley, Idaho.
And he writes, For Whom the Bell Tolls.
For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1940.
And it's a massive success.
Huge. Immediate bestseller, 500,000 copies sold in months. Biographers are clear. It triumphantly reestablished Hemingway's literary reputation, showed that his lean style could absolutely handle epic themes, large-scale political drama, romance, profound questions about life and death.
It pulls together all those threads, doesn't it? The WWI trauma, the power of nature, that idea of facing death with dignity.
Exactly. A real synthesis of everything he'd experienced and learned up to that point. #5, trauma, triumphs, and the final decades. 1941, 1961. So Pearl Harbor happens, December 41. The U.S. is in World War II. Hemingway's living in Cuba at Finca Vigia.
And he can't just sit it out, obviously.
No way. He jumps right in, but in his own, well, eccentric Hemingway fashion. He refits his beloved fishing boat, the Pilar.
Into a, what? A Q-boat? What's that?
A Q-boat historically was like a decoy ship. A heavily armed vessel disguised as an ordinary merchant ship designed to lure enemy submarines, U-boats in this case, into close range and then attack them.
So he turned his fishing boat into a submarine hunter.
Pretty much. Patrolling the Caribbean looking for German U-boats. And on top of that, he sets up his own amateur counterintelligence unit, ran it out of his guest house, trying to surveil Nazi sympathizers in Havana.
Okay, Hemingway, the Q-boat captain and spy master. It sounds like something straight out of his own fiction.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And all this cloak and dagger stuff, interestingly, led to the FBI compiling this massive file on him, 124 pages. They monitored him pretty closely for years after that.
Wow. Meanwhile, what's happened with Martha Gellhorn? The marriage.
It's failing. Under the strain of their competing careers, their different approaches to the war. She wanted him back in Europe as a correspondent. He was more into his, war games in Cuba.
Tensions rising.
Big time. Sources say they fought frequently and bitterly. She finally had enough, left for Europe on her own in 43, demanded a divorce.
So Hemingway eventually follows her to Europe as a correspondent.
Yeah, for Collier's magazine in 1944. And it's in London, covering the war buildup, that he meets Mary Welsh.
Time correspondent.
Right. Starts an affair almost immediately. And sticking to that pattern we talked about.
Your preemptive strike?
Asks her to marry him on their third meeting.
Third meeting.
Yep. His divorce from Martha becomes final, quite acrimoniously, in 1945. He marries Mary, his fourth and final wife, in 1946.
But the war itself keeps taking a toll physically, doesn't it? Another head injury.
A bad one. Just before D-Day, he's in a car accident in blackout London. Severe concussion, needed 57 stitches in his head.
And he still goes to cover the landings.
Tries to. He went with the troops heading for Normandy, bandage on his head, clearly suffering concussion symptoms. But the military brass, probably quite rightly, prevented him from actually going ashore. Too much of a liability.
But he finds other ways to get close to the action.
Oh, yes. Later in the campaign in France, he kind of bends the rules. Attaches himself to Colonel Charles Buck, Lanham's 22nd Infantry Regiment. And near Rambouillet, outside Paris, he becomes the sort of de facto leader of a small band of French resistance fighters, a village militia.
Which is completely against the rules for a correspondent, right? Geneva Convention.
Absolutely. Non-combatants aren't supposed to lead troops or engage in combat. He later beat the rap, as they say, by claiming he only offered advice. A pretty fine line. But his proximity to combat was real. He was definitely under fire. He was there for the liberation of Paris, even had a reconciliation with Gertrude Stein shortly before she died. And eventually, he was awarded a Bronze Star for bravery in 1947 for his service under fire in combat areas.
So the war ends. What happens in the post-war period, creatively?
It's a slump, a big one. He himself described it as being out of business as a writer from about 42 to 45.
Right.
He wrestled with these huge, ambitious projects that just stalled. The Garden of Eden, the Sea Book.
And this creative drought lines up with a physical decline.
Exactly. His body was starting to really feel the effects of, well, everything. The sources list it all. The chronic, heavy drinking making the impact of his previous head injuries worse.
How many head injuries did he have by then?
At least 9 documented serious concussions or head traumas by this point led to severe headaches, high blood pressure, weight gain, eventually diabetes. He was paying the cumulative price for that hard-lived life.
So getting back into writing was tough?
Very tough. His next published novel, Across the River and Into the Trees, 1950. It was inspired by this platonic affair he had with a much younger woman, Adriana Ivancic, in Venice.
And the critics hated it.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty negative reviews, which absolutely infuriated him. And it seems, almost in direct response to that backlash, he channeled that energy and wrote the draft of The Old Man and the Sea.
In just 8 weeks.
Just 8 weeks. Published in 1952, he called it the best I can write ever for all of my life.
And this time, the reception was different.
Totally different. The story of Santiago, the old Cuban fisherman,
Yeah.
is an international sensation, a huge comeback, proved his mastery was still there, won him the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1953.
But just when things seem back on track, Africa happens again, and it's almost unbelievable.
It really is stranger than fiction. January 1954, he's on a sightseeing trip in Africa with Mary. Plane crash number 1.
What happened?
Plane hits an abandoned utility pole trying to avoid some birds. Crashes. Hemingway injures his back, shoulder. Badly shaken but alive. So they need to get out. They charter another small plane almost immediately to fly to Entebbe for medical help. Plane number 2. The takeoff goes wrong. The landing strip is too rough, maybe engine trouble. It crashes on takeoff and bursts into flames.
Oh my God.
And the detail here is just staggering. Hemingway, trapped inside this burning wreckage, has to physically smash his way out by battering the flimsy door open with his head.
With his head, after already having multiple concussions.
With his head. The injuries from this second crash were catastrophic. fractured skull, 2 cracked spinal discs, ruptured kidney and liver, dislocated shoulder, and then later, adding insult to injury, he gets second-degree burns fighting a nearby bushfire.
It's amazing he survived. The press thought he hadn't, right?
Yeah, obituaries were published worldwide. Everyone assumed he was dead after 2 plane crashes in 2 days.
And while he's recovering from that.
While he's still recuperating, October 1954, the news comes. He's won the Nobel Prize in Literature.
Wow. Talk about timing. Receiving the highest literary honor just months after reading your own obituaries.
It's incredibly poignant, isn't it? He was too ill, too injured to travel to Stockholm to accept it.
But his acceptance speech, the one read for him, it's quite famous.
It is. He reflects on the cost of being a writer, that isolation. He says, "Writing at its best is a lonely life. He grows in public stature as he sheds his loneliness, and often his work deteriorates, for he does his work alone."
It perfectly captures that paradox, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
world-famous celebrity who believed fame was detrimental to the work itself.
The celebrated recluse. Exactly. Hashtag V-style, themes, and the tragic end.
Okay, so when we talk about Hemingway's legacy, the thing that lasts, we have to come back to his style, right?
Yep.
And that central idea.
The iceberg theory, or as he sometimes called it, the theory of omission. It's absolutely foundational. You can't really understand his work without grasping this.
Explain it again. It's like what you see is only a small part.
Exactly. It's the perfect metaphor, isn't it? The visible stuff, the facts, the dialogue, the action, the objective descriptions, that's like the 1/8 of the iceberg floating above the water.
Right.
But the other 7/8, the real bulk, the meaning, the symbolism, the deep emotion, the backstory, all of that operates submerged out of sight.
And that's deliberate. The writer leaves things out.
Deliberately. But crucially, the writer must omit things they know intimately. You can't omit something you don't understand yourself. That deep knowledge is what gives the sparse prose its weight, its resonance.
So the reader has to do some work.
The reader has to lean in, participate. You have to feel those unstated things based on the clues provided by the visible part. And this whole theory, this structure, it forced him into that famous style.
The short sentences.
Clear, short, declarative sentences. Simple grammar, almost childlike sometimes. Something like 70% of his sentences are simple sentences lacking complex clauses.
And that gave his writing that visual feel, didn't it? Almost cinematic.
Very cinematic, and intentionally so. He talked about using techniques like cutting quickly between scenes or splicing images together, creating what he called a multifocal photographic reality.
You can see the journalist's eye there.
Absolutely. Translating directly into literary technique.
Well, let's talk about emotion. Because the iceberg theory, did it mean no emotion?
That's the common misreading, isn't it? Early critics, and even some followers, thought he was trying to eliminate emotion, just focus on action, on the surface. But no, that wasn't the intent at all.
So what was the intent?
The intent was to portray emotion realistically, by relying on what the modernists, like Pound and Eliot, called objective correlatives.
Objective correlatives. Okay, meaning.
Instead of saying he felt devastated, you show the character performing an action or observing an object that evokes that feeling in the reader.
Like watching a cup shatter, or just standing silently by a river, like you said earlier.
Exactly. The emotion is conveyed indirectly through this carefully chosen collage of objective images, facts, and actions. Hemingway felt that trying to describe emotion directly was maybe dishonest or just beyond him as a trained newspaper guy. He said the important thing was to know the sequence of motion and fact which made the emotion.
So the iceberg theory was almost like literary armor, allowing him to deal with tough subjects indirectly.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
Describing unspeakable trauma through action and implication rather than explicit emotional declaration.
Okay, so using that technique, what were the big themes he kept returning to?
Well, the recurring ones are pretty clear. Love, war, expatriation, wilderness, loss. Nature, for instance, is huge.
As a place for redemption.
Often, yeah. A place for rebirth, for rest, where characters, especially men wounded physically or psychologically, can find solitude and maybe start to heal. Think of Nick Adams again in Big Two-Hearted River.
And the focus is often on the act itself, right? The fishing, the hunting.
The rigor, the discipline, the dignity found in the skilled act itself, rather than just, say, winning or losing. It's about how you do it.
And underpinning all of it, death.
Always. Death permeates his work. Characters often achieve authenticity, or maybe redemption, by how they face death with courage, with dignity.
Right, yeah.
Whether it's Francis Macomber or a bullfighter in the ring, or Santiago fighting the sharks.
It's that idea that if the world is ultimately meaningless, as many modernists felt.
Then the only real response is an authentic, courageous action in the face of that meaninglessness. Grace under pressure.
Okay, but we also have to touch on the gender stuff, because
Yeah.
that's been a big point of critique, hasn't it?
Hugely contentious.
Yeah.
Early critics often praised his male-centric world, saw the women sometimes falling into these archetypes, the castrator or the love slave.
But later critics pushed back hard.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Later feminist critics especially characterized a lot of his work as deeply misogynistic. They point to the way characters like Brett Ashley in The Sun or Stars Rises are framed, sometimes seen as this destructive, dark woman goddess figure, versus someone like Margot McComber in The Short Happy Life, who's arguably presented as a kind of light woman and also a potential murderess.
It's complex and often uncomfortable.
And the theme of emasculation comes up a lot too, constantly. Literal emasculation from war wounds, like Jake Barnes in The Sun, also rises, but also figurative emasculation in relationships. Critics often tie this directly to the broader cultural and psychological wounds of that post-WWI generation.
Okay, which brings us sadly to his final years, the decline.
Yeah, the final struggle. They moved from Cuba to Ketchum, Idaho in 1959. Castro was nationalizing property, but it also coincided with a really severe mental downturn for Hemingway.
He was working on the Paris memoir then, wasn't he? A Movable Feast.
Yes, shaping it from notebooks he'd rediscovered famously in trunks left at the Ritz Hotel in Paris back in 1956, a return to that formative time.
But his mental state was deteriorating rapidly.
Paranoia became overwhelming. He was absolutely convinced the FBI was actively monitoring him in Ketchum, tapping phones, intercepting mail.
And the chilling thing is, they were, weren't they? To some extent.
They were. As we mentioned, they had compiled a huge file on him over the years due to his Cuba activities and other things, and apparently surveillance did continue right up until his death. So some of his paranoia had a basis in reality, which must have made it even worse.
And physically.
Failing eyesight made writing incredibly difficult. He couldn't organize complex manuscripts like The Dangerous Summer, his account of the 1959 bullfighting season, just physically and mentally couldn't manage it.
And then came the diagnosis.
1961. Diagnosed with hereditary hemochromatosis.
Which is?
It's a genetic condition where your body absorbs too much iron from your diet. The iron builds up in your tissues, organs, liver, heart, pancreas, and crucially the brain. It leads to serious physical and mental deterioration over time.
So you've got this genetic condition, plus the lifetime of heavy drinking, plus the head injuries.
All those head injuries, 9 or more serious concussions, battering his head against that plane door in Africa. Neuropsychiatrists looking back now widely believe he was suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE.
Like athletes get.
Exactly, a form of dementia caused by repeated brain trauma. It would have profoundly worsened his depression, paranoia, cognitive decline. A perfect storm, really.
And the treatment they tried was controversial.
Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. He was admitted to the Mayo Clinic for severe depression and underwent multiple sessions, maybe as many as 15, in late 60 and early 61.
And for a writer whose entire capital was his mind, his memory.
It was devastating. He lamented it bitterly, said something like, "What is the sense of ruining my head and erasing my memory, which is my capital, and putting me out of business?" He felt it destroyed his ability to write.
And just days after being released from the Mayo Clinic the last time.
July 1961. Just 2 days after getting home to Ketchum, he, quite deliberately, as Mary later put it, took his favorite shotgun and ended his life.
Mirroring his father's suicide decades before.
Tragically, yes. And that pattern continued in the family. His sister Ursula, his brother Lester. They also later died by suicide. A very dark thread running through the Hemingways.
It's such a tragic end. But despite that, his influence, it's immense.
Undeniable. That style, the lean, hard, athletic prose, you could argue it's the single biggest change, the most fundamental shift in American writing in the 20th century.
You either copied it or reacted against it.
Exactly. You couldn't ignore it. His stories, his way of seeing and writing, as the sources say, they're just unequivocally part of our cultural heritage now. Hashtag, tag, tag, outro.
So we've really seen a life of just extreme contradictions, haven't we? Here's this man who craved grand adventure, danger, almost self-aggrandizing exploits, but wrote with the precision, the stripped-down clinical focus of a journalist.
Yeah. And the writer who chased fame, celebrity, became this huge public figure, yet constantly said he believed his work got worse as he lost that essential loneliness of the artist.
It's fascinating.
And the power of that work, I think, lies in how he managed to take the almost incomprehensible trauma of his time, the chaos of war, the betrayals of the body, the losses, and somehow give it form. Structured, powerful simplicity, using techniques like the iceberg theory.
Giving objective shape to all that inner turmoil.
That's it exactly.
So we really encourage you, if you revisit his work, maybe the sun also rises, maybe the old man in the sea, do it with this context in mind. Look for those wounds, the physical influences, the journalistic rigor behind every single carefully chosen, simple sentence.
See what's under the water.
Yeah.
And maybe here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We've talked about the iceberg theory, how its function was to convey powerful emotion through objective description, through facts and action.
Right.
Knowing what we now suspect about Hemingway's struggles, the untreated physical trauma from head injuries, the CTE, the deep mental anguish, does that legendary toughness of his style represent a kind of courageously faced truth? Or is it perhaps a masterful literary armor, something crafted specifically to conceal an overwhelming inner breakdown that he simply couldn't face, or perhaps couldn't even articulate directly?
Courage or concealment. Or maybe both.
Maybe both. Something to think about.